am here today with Captain Jeff Silwell, who is from the Community Services Division of the Rochester Police. And Captain Silwell, we are so glad to have you here.
Nice. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us as we continue on our series with being a good neighbor and what it means to be a good neighbor in some specific ways here in Rochester and Olmsted County and in our individual neighborhoods and lives and also in our larger community. So I'll start with a question around what the concept of being a good neighbor means to you.
Well, I think it's really about looking out for each other and caring about each other and really seeing a community and a neighborhood as an inclusive place where everybody has everybody else's best interest at heart. I think that really is where we see success when that happens, and we see failure when that doesn't happen.
Absolutely, absolutely. Where have you seen in particular, can you think of any examples of where you've seen people being good neighbors or practical ways that people have lived into that?
Well, I think we see it every day in our regular work. You know, people call when they haven't seen a neighbor for a while, or those types of things, or they think someone needs help. So again, we certainly see it that, but also just sort of looking out for the neighborhood kids. I live in a neighborhood that's very vibrant with young children, and we all kind of try to keep an eye on the kids, and our kids play together, and again, it's really it's kind of that takes the village to raise good kids, and you see that in neighborhoods all over Rochester.
Yeah, absolutely. And a little bit, I think, of vulnerability and being willing to put yourself out there to get to know other people and allow yourself to be known as a neighbor.
Oh, for sure. And I think I heard this from a religious leader once, when we were talking about problems in today's society, and it was kind of this concept of, we once were a front porch society where you sat out front and you talked to your neighbors, and we've kind of become a back deck community where, we only invite people in that might share our views, and we don't like to hear other opinions. And again, I think what we find in really thriving neighborhoods is people that really have this sense of community, that we're all in this together, and that we value each other and value what each of us brings.
Absolutely, absolutely. One of the things that inspired this series was reading a book that we're using as part of this series called The Art of Neighboring. And it's a group of pastors who met with some leadership out in Denver, and who talked about sitting down with some of the leadership of the city to talk about what would make the biggest difference in the city to kind of bring people together. And they were really stunned to find out that the leadership said to them, well, if you all could just live into what you're supposed to be doing of loving your neighbors, that would actually do it, right?
Yeah, the Bible tells us how to do it, right?
Right, exactly. There's you got your instructions right there. So what do you think are some of the main challenges that people might face in neighbors and neighborhoods in Rochester? What are some of the barriers to being?
Well, I think you mentioned it earlier. You have to put yourself out there. You have to be willing to. Sometimes you have to be willing to take the first step and make people feel safe in your presence, and that they do belong. And obviously we live in a media-driven society that would prefer to focus solely on our differences rather than our commonalities. And that's really, in the work I do in the community, I'm responsible for community services. And when I first, we created this job as the first person to have it, I was focused totally on the service, providing services to the community. But I've really come to embrace this sense of community and how when people feel included and you put a police officer as part of the community, not somebody coming into the community, the outcomes are so much better. And so the challenges are really, social media, people that would prefer to place themselves in a higher position or want to focus just on our differences. And what you find when you talk to a wide variety of people is, although we have tons of different beliefs, we all just want to thrive, and we want success, and we want our children to grow up and be successful. And when you spend a little time focusing on commonalities, you really find we have way more in common than we have differences.
Yeah, it makes me think about the role of listening in being a good neighbor, because I think if part of what we're doing and going about our lives as a community is just focusing on what we need to say and tell people and not on what we hear about other people's experiences and lives. That feels like listening feels like a really critical part of how we help to understand and gain empathy and knowledge around other people who are our neighbors, especially if they're not from a similar background.
Sure, and I mean, I can't emphasize that enough either. It's like the humanity in people and seeing them, not only as a neighbor that maybe has a barking dog, but as a person that has a whole life and that has challenges, and how do we sort of work together. And I think we far too often see people that are pointing out differences and are dehumanizing people, and then really you can't dehumanize another without dehumanizing yourself. I really thoroughly believe that. That you when you get to know somebody, it's really hard to hold biased beliefs or other beliefs about them, because now they're a real person. They're not some object in theory. They're a real human being that's just trying to reach their goals just like you are. Right, absolutely. One of the things when I think about neighbors and neighboring that has been a tool and also a complicated tool is something like Nextdoor, right? That's a listserv and ways of connecting neighbors that I think has a lot of really good things about getting to know each other. But there's obviously also places where that has proven problematic or complicated in the ways that people are sort of reporting things and sharing information about each other. So how do you feel like we can help to care for each other as neighbors without sort of becoming inherently suspicious or judgmental of folks that we might not recognize or might not know? Well, I think you really hit the listening piece. Mm-hmm. Taking time to, and again, COVID's been a problem with this, but sit down with people and just talk about their life, not about the speeders on the street or something, and really get to know each other. I totally agree with you. Technology saves time and does things that are wonderful, but it also has a tendency to take out that personal aspect of I know your name and I know you live in the brown house, but I don't know anything else about you unless there's a problem in the neighborhood or something's happened. And really, that's some of the things we try to do is be there before there's a problem, right? Because then you don't have to establish rapport and find out things. You already know each other. Absolutely. It feels like it's really easy for us to fill in the gaps of what we don't know about people with based on assumptions or just guesses, and certain, especially with neighbors, you might see outside things happening or patterns or how many cars are in their driveway or who's coming and going, and there's, I think, our version of what we think might be happening in someone's life could be quite different. Correct. And if you have something to, I love your point there. If you have the chance to develop and cultivate a relationship, not based on I want to talk to you about your barking dog or the fact you haven't shoveled your sidewalk. I think it's important to think about reasons to cultivate relationship for the sake of loving and knowing our neighbors. Correct. I just think the outcomes are much better, and everybody wants to be happy and successful and all those things, and I think this listening, talking is the answer to a lot of problems in the world. Absolutely. How do you feel like we can be good neighbors, in particular, to people who are more vulnerable in our community, people who are food insecure or unhoused? What sort of practices that we can use to think about being good neighbors? Well, I think you really, again, we work a lot in people experience homeless space, and you really have to, it's tough to just say hello to someone sometimes when you're going, okay, I can see something's not right. So again, I still, I've over the last 2 years, I've spoke with many people that are in various states of homelessness or food insecurity, and they all have a story too. And once you get to know that story, that it's kind of like that first step is the hardest, right? How are you doing today? Or is there anything I could do to help you? And human beings, regardless of where they are in their status in life, need a lot of the same things, and that's affirmation that they matter, that is there a way I can help you, and it's much easier. I know everybody's busy, and just turn and walk the other way or cross the street. It's much harder to say, how are you doing today? Is there anything I could do to help? And again, I think the Bible gives us many of these answers, and or faith of all sorts give us many answers to these problems, and we often ignore them.
Yeah, and again, coming back to thinking about being able to see someone as a human being and understand a story, that there is a story there. Can you talk a little bit about, that makes me think of, in thinking about in policing work, how do you help to keep that in front of you as part of your work? You have difficult jobs that put you in intense situations. How do you help to keep a human face to people as well?
I think where we see police failing is when we look at people as problems, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is a problem I have to solve, and we lose that sort of, this is a human being that needs something, and often we're put into situations where maybe it's a business owner doesn't like a person that's doing this or whatever. So it is complex, but again, I think it really comes down to seeing the humanity in everybody and not seeing them as a problem that you're paid to solve. And again, we're big on trying to be there before there's a crisis, and that could be a mental health crisis, that could be a criminal type of situation, but if you know somebody, it's just really harder to make those quick judgments that are often wrong.
Absolutely. And there's some humility that comes with part of that too, that probably is part of the good practice of being able to.
Sure, well, it's always, if you can say, as I have many times there, but by the grace of God go I,
right.
It makes it a lot easier.
Absolutely. Are there any tangible practices? You've named a few, but any other ways that you can think about, ways that we might encourage folks in our congregation and our community? And I would say we have kind of a dual focus in this series to not only encourage them to be neighborly and really get to know the people who are living in the areas around where they live, but to think about folks in our larger Rochester, Olmsted County community as part of our neighbors, and even get to know people better, or ways to learn more about people's stories who might not live immediately near us but are still part of our community.
So I think, like, you see the successes you have in a church community or maybe a sports community or and again, because there you're mostly around people with somewhat similar belief systems, so it does become more difficult, but again, I think challenging your own beliefs, and again, that first step is the hardest, right? To really, once you have success in doing something, then you want to do it again and again.
Sure.
And so, again, I think it's inviting them in, and understanding, they might not be where I'm to on my faith or my beliefs, but I still want them to know that I care. And when people feel cared and respected, they'll do wonderful things that you would never initially expect. And I really do believe some of the things we're trying to do is, particularly in marginalized communities, is make them feel like Rochester is their home, right? Because what we find when they don't feel that way, you see what happens in some big cities where, crime and damage and the power of including people and making people feel wanted is way, it is real powerful. And again, we strive to do that every day in the space that we can. But again, I think the rest of the community has a role to play in that also.
Absolutely, I totally agree. And we sometimes use the imagery and the language around sort of widening the circle.
Right.
And the idea of not just saying, I hope you will become part of this thing that I am, but how I like your description of that, of continuing to grow into who we really are with the folks that are here and with the people that are part of our community, and to recognize that as a gift and a way that we can continue to get to know each other and to understand our identity as a community.
Yeah, no, I think, again, I've learned over and over, mostly in the last couple of years when I've really been in space that police aren't typically in, problem. I got to solve this problem, then go to the next one where I have the time to listen, that I really see this power of community. And it focuses the work we're doing with communities that are struggling with a wide variety of issues. But you just see when they feel like you care and that they belong here. Rochester's good at, someone once told me, well, you're not local to Rochester. I've been here like 28 years. When do I get my local card?
Right.
When do I get the card that says I'm a local now,
Right, right.
And so again, I think, I think there's tons of great things going on in this community, but,
Sure.
but yeah, I think just that, I never really realized how much being a sense of belonging and community meant to a whole wide variety of individuals.
Absolutely, absolutely. And how much the word welcome
Right.
goes a long way
Right.
in creating relationship.
Yeah,
starting place.
100%.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing with us and for being
thanks
part
for
of our conversation. I am looking forward to ways that we can continue to partner with the city and with you and with our community for ways that we can be good neighbors, and look forward to growing into that. And I hope that you will see some continued efforts and changes in that as we as a congregation explore this really intentionally in this season. And so we look
I
forward
love it. When you approached me on this, I'm like, this is just a great idea, and I can't wait to see what your congregation gains from it, and the community gains. When you gain, the community will gain.
Thank you.
Probably twice as much or more. So
Thank you. Well, we do too. We do too. We're really glad to talk with you today. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us.